Hi everyone, my name is Nina. Thank you so much for tuning in to Down the Rabbit Hole tonight. I'm here with my producer Edgar, who I'm assuming is not mic'd at this point. Not mic'd. But thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I know it's been a long time. I don't really have an excuse other than I was having a hard time deciding what to talk about, actually. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot I could just keep ranting about, like I could keep ranting about race or keep ranting about COVID and all of that stuff, but I really didn't want to talk about that anymore. But a couple of things happened recently that really got me jazzed up and inspired. So we're here, I'm ready. I'm sorry it's been so long, but I hope that you guys enjoy what I have for you tonight. So as indicated by my title card here, I'm going to talk a little bit about Oklahoma, and when I say that, I mean the Supreme Court decision that came down recently. It's McGirt v. Oklahoma, and it's going to be the first installment of what I'd like to call, or a series that I'd like to call, Crazy Ass Shit the Supreme Court Said. Okay? So this is the first installment of that. I'll also use that as a mechanism to teach you guys a little bit about constitutional law. But I think this is a good place to start because I haven't seen a Supreme Court ruling this insane in quite some time. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about Castle Doctrine in terms of the Property Manifesto because the Castle Doctrine would be very strong in a propertarian society. And as we saw in Missouri, the whole idea of being able to defend your property, your land with firearms is kind of under attack right now. So we're going to talk about the Castle Doctrine, and I'm going to specifically talk about Colorado's Castle Doctrine too, so that if people who live in Colorado want to know more about what their rights are, what our limitations are here, they can know a little bit more about that. And then lastly, I'll talk about kind of something that's not really being reported all that much in the media, but there's basically Christian and Catholic churches that are getting burned down and vandalized all over the world. So we're just going to talk about that a little bit because I think that it needs to be reported on more. So if I'm the one who has to be part of that, then I will be part of that. But yeah, so let's get to some crazy ass shit that the Supreme Court said, okay? So some little background on this case. Most of you probably know of this case as the case where they basically, quote unquote, gave back like half of Oklahoma. And just for some background, this is the fact pattern that got this case in front of the Supreme Court. McGirt, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but the named party in this case, he was convicted in Oklahoma of what they said was, quote, this is the Supreme Court's phrasing, serious sexual offenses. 3 of them. So, I guess they're not saying outright that it was rape or necessarily, but a serious sexual offense. So this guy was convicted of 3 sexual offenses in Oklahoma. He appealed his conviction on the grounds that Oklahoma didn't have the jurisdiction to prosecute him for these things, on the basis of an agreement that was signed between Oklahoma and the Creek Nation in 1901. And on the basis of this document, he says that this old agreement was misunderstood, and this entire part of Oklahoma actually should belong to the Creek Nation under this agreement. And the Supreme Court agreed. The Supreme Court said, yeah, you know, basically they spend like 40 pages or so saying, what did Congress really mean? Or what did this agreement really mean? What did Congress do about it? Did Congress say anything about this agreement? But they completely miss huge common law ideas here, and that's why we end up with such an egregious ruling. So in essence, what happened is that a man was convicted of serious sexual offenses. He said that they didn't have the right to do that because all of that land actually belonged to, or actually should have been an Indian reservation. And the court was like, yeah, because of some agreement signed in 1901, all of this land in Oklahoma, you know, all those people who live on there, doesn't matter. That's actually all territory of the Cherokee Nation, and by that they mean it's a part of the Cherokee Nation reservation, to be clear. Now, the Oklahoma, like the attorneys for Oklahoma did at least try to argue something along the lines of that historical practice and the demographics of Oklahoma make this wrong. But even that is just, it's such a flimsy argument. I can't believe these attorneys. I mean, someone should be getting sued for malpractice here. Or I don't know, the Supreme Court should just be, I don't even know what to do with the Supreme Court at this point, because this is just so bad. But basically the effect of this is that a decent amount of Oklahoma, the eastern part I think, or at least where Tulsa is, I'm not familiar with Oklahoma geography that much, but the entire city of Tulsa and about a decent chunk of Oklahoma is now under completely different jurisdiction than it was before. And think about what that means for a second. So if you live in Oklahoma, all of a sudden, if you live in Tulsa, the laws that you thought you were living under or that you thought had been in place since 1901, no, that's not true. That was all just a lie. This land is under a different jurisdiction, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I just want to talk about why, like, gutturally, we probably have an instinct that this feels wrong, right? And that's kind of what they argued, is that this doesn't feel right, does it? But we actually have common law doctrine that gives us reasons why this doesn't make sense. And the fact that, okay, I actually subjected myself to the entire 85-page opinion on this, both the majority opinion and the dissent, all right? And the majority opinion, by the way, was written by Neil Gorsuch, our beloved Colorado originalist, quote-unquote conservative justice wrote this opinion, okay? But they didn't mention either of these doctrines that I'm about to talk about, or any of these three doctrines I'm about to talk about. And they really just focused on, well, what did Congress say or do? Congress bickered about this over the decades. It's like, who cares? What about property law, man? So we're going to talk about that. The first thing that I think that we should all understand is adverse possession, all right? Adverse possession is kind of, to put it in a Reader's Digest version, that means like, if you don't use it, you lose it, especially if someone else is using it, okay? So, let's say I've got lots of acres of land, all right? Like I've got a big farm or like ranch or whatever, and from my house, I can't even see all of my land. And so someone decides to come in and build a house on a part of my property, and because I'm kind of negligent to my land, like I'm not paying attention, I don't notice that they do this. And these people start living on my land, and they do that for 20 years. If I come to know that they're doing that, and I don't do anything about it, and I don't actively say, you have to get off my property, or if I don't say anything in regards to you have to get off my property for 20 years, then that property becomes theirs. And I'll talk about the actual specific requirements that are needed for adverse possession to be put in place, but it's basically the idea that if you don't defend your property line, and someone else comes in and starts using that land, appropriating its resources, makes it their home, and they start to rely on that for years, then you can't just say that that's still my property. You gave that up. That's what adverse possession is. So there's elements to adverse possession, just like anything. If we were in a court, we'd have to prove elements of a claim. So the first thing is actual possession, and that's what I talk about when I say someone actually built a house on my land. They're actually possessing that land. Remember I talk about the bundle of sticks? They're using that right to possess as to that part of the land. Adverse. Adverse means that it's contrary to the interest of the owner of the land. So that would mean that, in my eyes, they're a trespasser. I didn't invite them. They decided to come of their own volition against my wishes, actually. And it's actually, a violation of my property rights for them to be there to start. Let's see. Hostile. Hostile means that that person is defending their property rights to that space. So not only are they making it their own in violation of your rights, but they're defending that space. Like maybe they built a fence around part of your land, right? So that would be hostile. Under the claim of right means that, excuse me, how do I explain this without sounding just like an obnoxious lawyer here? So basically, the person who owned the property first had to actually have a valid title to it. So if I was lying about that being my land, then they can't really say that they're violating my property rights when it's not even my land. So it has to actually be someone's land, right? So that's what under a claim of right means. And exclusive means that they're not sharing that land with me, right? It's not like we created some communal situation where I gave them an easement or something and we're sharing our whole property of land, or we signed some agreement where we're both allowed to be on the land. They're excluding me from part of my land. And then also for an uninterrupted statutory period of time. Now in Colorado, the statutory period of time is 18 years. But in law school, I learned that it averages around 20. And this makes sense to me, right? I mean, if you let someone live on your land for 20 years, and you've seen them there, you don't do anything about it. I mean, who are you after 20 years to go in and tell them they have to get off? It's not like you were protecting it. You weren't acting like it was your land. You weren't exercising your right to exclude. And at a certain point, if someone starts to use the resources of a specific area and tame that land and defend that land, they're exercising that bundle of sticks there. And after a certain amount of time, it becomes theirs. And this is old doctrine. Okay, adverse possession, this goes back to before the US was a thing, This is old English common law. If you don't defend your property rights, you can lose it to someone who is taking it in that manner. Now, obviously, if you're fighting against them the whole time, in terms of you're actively on that property trying to get them off of there, that's one thing. But if you just kind of are mostly standing idly by for 20 years, you can't say anything. So now let's think about that in terms of this case. So we've got the citizens of Oklahoma who have literally been under the impression that this is their land, and they've been using the resources there, they've been exercising their bundle of sticks there since 1901. And now the Supreme Court thinks that this entity, or by entity, human being of course, this defendant, this accused convicted criminal of sexual offenses, McGirt, can now just come by and say, but this wasn't even their land, man. This hasn't been their land, since 1901. It's like, well, that claim is kind of expired, so to speak. Adverse possession should kick in here. And this is one of those times where even if the attorneys didn't raise this issue, the Supreme Court should have sua sponte issued an order saying, no, we're not going to give away half of Oklahoma, because at least under the doctrine of adverse possession, all of the citizens of this space are under the jurisdiction of the land where they think that they have been. It's just the way that adverse possession works, and it makes sense. And this gets into part of the other common law doctrine, which is that there's a statute of limitations on claims like this. So I looked it up. In the United States, the statute of limitations for written contracts involving real estate, right? There are let's see, a total of 40 states where the statute of limitations for that is 6 years or less. So let's say you had a real estate agreement, and you bought a house or something, and you find out that it wasn't at all as advertised. They lied in the paperwork. The realtor lied, all of that. And you don't say anything or bring a lawsuit within 6 years, that's it. You can't come back and say you breached this contract now, or you violated, you committed some tort with regards to this contract, or you violated this contract and that's a breach of contract, yada yada. The limit's 6 years. So or something like this, right, where it's about the definition of property lines. If you wanted to bring a claim contesting that, you'd only have 6 years to do that, or less, in at least 40 of the states. In Colorado, you only have 3 years to contest an agreement like that. In Oklahoma, it's 5. There's only 10 other states that have more than 6 years, and the most is 10. So the longest you could wait to challenge a real estate borderline agreement like that would be 10 years. Now, this agreement goes back to 1901, and we're in 2020. The Supreme Court basically said that it's okay to challenge an agreement from oh my God, it is just mind-blowing. From 119 years ago. So 10 times the statute of limitations in any U.S. state. And we're going to give away half of Oklahoma and not even mention this. I mean, seriously, this is crazy-ass shit the Supreme Court said, okay? We're supposed to have a rule of law in this country. And that doesn't just mean what Trump is always spouting about, like law and order, law and order. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. The rule of law, at its core, is basically an understanding that when you live in a country like America, you have a basic understanding of, or you can basically rely on what laws you're being governed under. You know, you can have a basic understanding of the laws that apply to you and your land and your property and your life. But this is basically saying, oh, all that British common law, yeah, we're not even going to talk about that. We're going to talk for 86 pages and not mention any of this, all right? Not to mention that even if you're not going to acknowledge the common law aspect of this, think about how shocking to the conscience it is to give away all of that property. I mean, people have been on that land for decades, generations. And you're just going to say, oh, well, because of some misunderstanding in a contract from 1901, your entire understanding of your rule of law or what jurisdiction you think you live in, who governs you, that's all been a lie. And it doesn't matter how long ago that contract was signed. So property rights are in real trouble, man. A conservative, quote-unquote, justice wrote this opinion. An originalist wrote this opinion, okay? This is dangerous stuff. Basically, in one foul swoop, they obliterated hundreds of years of English common law and the property rights of hundreds of thousands of people. And people were tweeting about it, kind of like it trended for about a day, and then no one cared. And people are just too worried about, coronavirus or something to care about the fact that you can't even reasonably rely on the Supreme Court to say, no, I'm sorry, this land has been under this jurisdiction for over 100 years. and you can't challenge that now. There's a limit. There's a time limit on that. Not just because we want to be cruel to Native Americans. It's not about that, but it's about having a rule of law where the individuals who live in this country can have a reasonable reliance on the fact that their property rights are going to be protected, and that real estate that they possess in a certain jurisdiction will be governed by certain laws. And apparently the Supreme Court doesn't give a shit about that. So, anyway, clearly, like, you can tell that this Supreme Court ruling really pissed me off. It's one of the worst ones I've heard in a while. Do you have any thoughts on this, Edgar? No? All right.
Awesome to see the passion.
I am passionate about it. I mean, the all rights are property rights thing, like, I really mean that, man. And if we lose our property rights, that's game over. That's game over. So, it's actually a very heavy property rights night, because we're also going to talk about castle doctrine now. So, this couple in St. Louis, I mean, oh my God, bless their heart, especially like with their fashion choices. And I mean, talk about some of the worst gun safety that I've ever seen. Dude literally pointed the rifle at his wife's head like multiple times, you know? It's like, man, you better be glad that, I don't know, that, I mean, I guess they said that at least as it pertained to her weapon, it was inoperable, and they knew that. But I mean, come on, you guys just look crazy. But with all of that being said, these people had every right to defend their property the way they did. Personally, you know, not just personally, in a propertarian society rather, I think that they would have been within their rights to actually shoot these people, like with deadly force actually. I think especially given that they were arriving in a mob. But let's talk a little bit about the specifics of the case. So they've been charged with unlawful use of a weapon on their own property, even though they never fired a shot. That's insane. Basically for pointing guns at quote-unquote peaceful protesters in their yard who basically, they had already torn down a fence, okay? This was private property. And when I say that, I don't just say it was a neighborhood or something and people own that land privately, but it was a gated community. And they tore down a fence to get in there. They were in a large group. They had masks, or they were wearing masks. Thanks all these COVID people now, by the way, for making everyone look like a criminal and being able to act righteous about it. But they had masks, they were in a group, they were trespassing on private property in a gated community. And all these people did was come out and brandish weapons. Yeah, they pointed them at them, sure. But they didn't shoot anybody. And they were certainly within their rights under Missouri law. I was actually listening to more details about their castle doctrine earlier today. And they basically have the doctrine that I would have in a propertarian society, which is that your real estate is your, it is your castle, right? And you can defend that from violence with violence if you need to. It's not, you don't have to be in a position where someone's literally running you down with a gun. If you've got a big mob of people in masks and weapons on your property, that's enough, man. A reasonable person would think that you might be under threat of violence or imminent bodily harm with that, and that should be enough, period. Because you have to be able to defend your property rights, and it's like I was saying with the adverse possession, right? You got to be able, if someone's trying to start building a house on your land, you got to be able to go over there with a gun and be like, get the fuck off my land, dude. What are you doing? Because the truth is, someone who's trying to build a house on your land, you know, they're not necessarily being violent to you. You know, they're not threatening you with bodily harm, but they're trespassing. They're doing something that is a gross violation of your property rights, and they're trying to make your land theirs. So there's a lot of different reasons why I think you should be able to use deadly force in defense of your property. And, you know, I can't believe that that this prosecutor brought these charges against these people in light of the Castle Doctrine's strength in the state of Missouri. Quite frankly, I'd be surprised if this attorney doesn't eventually get disbarred for this, especially because I found out that they actually, they were caught tampering evidence. So, of course, because they can't actually prove that this couple committed any crimes, especially given that the woman's gun was inoperable. But basically what the prosecutor did was she had them, okay, so what they had done to make the gun inoperable, I guess they used it in some kind of civil case or something, but they flipped the pin. I forget which pin it was. The trigger pin? Am I crazy? Edgar, help me. If you, like, there's a pin you need to be able to fire the gun. And if it's not in just the right spot, it won't go off. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Which gun?
She had a little semi-automatic pistol or something. Yeah. But in any event, they had purposely put the pin in backwards so that the gun wouldn't fire. And the prosecutor ordered the people who were handling the evidence to dismantle the gun and to reassemble it and to test it to make sure it would shoot. And then it did. And now they're like, listen, look, now the gun works, see? But they had records of the fact that it was inoperable, and they had people within, I guess, the DA's office who were like, whoa, like you can't do this. So they were caught tampering with evidence, and really what they're trying to say, what these prosecutors are trying to say, is that if you try to defend your property with deadly force, we're going to make an example out of you, especially if you do it with a gun. I feel like if they had come out there with a baseball bat, this probably wouldn't be a story, but it's because of this attempt at, gun confiscation and all this anti-two-way sentiment in our country that, if they're like, ooh, guns are scary, you shouldn't be, like, don't brandish scary guns in front of protesters. It's like, what are protesters doing breaking into a gated community in a mob? That's not a protest, man. Okay, so let's talk about Colorado's relevant Castle Doctrine. We actually don't have as strong of phrasing as Missouri does, although it is pretty good in terms of within your actual dwelling. Okay, so Colorado has what we call our Make My Day law, which I do appreciate the title of that, or a colloquial title of that. But basically, if someone breaks into your home, into Colorado, and you think that they're going to commit a crime in there, even if it's not violent, like let's say you thought they broke into your home to steal some jewelry, you can use deadly force in that instance. You don't have to actually fear imminent bodily harm or serious bodily injury. But again, to be clear, this is within the four walls of your home or within the four walls of your vehicle. Okay, so in their case, right, this law actually wouldn't apply because the protesters didn't breach, like they didn't go inside of their home. They didn't actually smash a window and go in there or kick in the door and go in there. So this is sort of like, if you're going to be trying to burgle, you better be expecting, or like you should reasonably expect that there could be a gun in your face, and that's fine, because this is sort of, it's like a smaller castle, right? Like I guess we're not going all the way out to the moat in Colorado, but your castle is your four walls of your home, and if someone breaks in there, you have every right to use deadly force on them in the state of Colorado. That is Colorado Revised Statutes 18-1-704.5. So you can read that language yourself if you'd like. Now we also have companion laws, one of which is when you can use deadly force in defense of a person, whether it be yourself or somebody else. And in that instance, you do have to actually reasonably believe that you're in threat of imminent serious bodily injury. Now, again, I feel like most of the times where you would want, or like where the average person would use deadly force in a public situation or in defense of someone else would be because they think that someone else is about to get killed or be raped or suffer, you know, a brutal beating or something like that. So I think that in general, that's a pretty good, that's actually a pretty good law, right? You really shouldn't shoot someone unless, shoot someone just in defense of your own self. Like, you can't really argue that it's self-defense if you're not at risk of being hurt, right? And if someone just is gonna slap you, it's really not, it's not really self-defense to shoot someone with a gun if all they can really do is slap you. You know what I mean? So I think the equal and opposite force in that regard makes some sense. So that's fine to me. I do think that our castle doctrine in terms of our actual real estate on the land could be a little bit better. I think that our Make My Day law could extend to all of our property, not just the house itself, but to people who are coming onto your property generally as a trespasser, especially if they're asked to leave and they refuse. But I also want to point out that there is not a duty to retreat in Colorado. Some states have this though, so bear that in mind. But basically the duty to retreat is, this is just so awful. It's like, if someone is attacking you or your property, you have to try to get away first before you can defend yourself with force. Some of these states will say, if there's a reasonable path of escape that you can see, then you have to try to use that before you use force in self-defense. But in my opinion, if someone's aggressing at you, you know, you really shouldn't have a duty to retreat. And I'm glad that we have that in Colorado. But in a propertarian society, if someone is on your property and they refuse to leave, you should be able to use whatever kind of force is necessary to get them to leave, especially when leaving will not cause them death. So remember I talked about trespass by necessity, right? So you can't shoot them because they're trespassing if they're on your land because they're running away from something else that's threatening their life. Obviously, as soon as that's gone, you have the right to kick them off. But at a certain point, a trespasser is a trespasser, and you don't have to put up with that in a propertarian society because you have the right to exclude. And if people don't, here's the thing. I would say that in a propertarian society, there probably would be some kind of warning shot required. All right? You probably would have to put the trespasser on notice that they're trespassing before you could use deadly force. That would be my limit because an unknowing trespasser being met with deadly force, you know, then we're getting into a place where you have a person who's not knowingly violating your rights, and for that to be met with death is a bit extreme. But someone who, they know they're trespassing, you've warned them that if they don't leave there will be deadly force and they stay, in a propertarian society that would be completely justified. And I really don't see any argument against that if you truly believe in property rights. Because, like, let's say I lived by myself on a really big plot of land, and I didn't have any firearms. And there was like a group of people like this who just decided they wanted to start the adverse possession process on my property. What am I gonna do about like let's say there's like 10 burly dudes who are trying to start building or like trying to start a house project on my property. If I can't threaten them with a gun or deadly force, how am I supposed to get them to leave? You have to have a mechanism of exclusion. Unless you have a way to enforce your rights, they don't really exist. So in order to be able to enforce your right to exclude from your real estate, you really need to be able to threaten deadly force and use deadly force if the threat is not heeded. So that is the castle doctrine. I think that what is happening in Missouri is an absolute disgrace. The governor, I think, has said that if they are actually convicted, he will pardon them. But I just don't understand why. I mean, I guess I'll have to look at more details, because I'm not as familiar with how the exact hierarchy works in terms of who can tell who to dismiss a case within like the Attorney General's office and the local district attorney. I'm not exactly sure how all of that works. But I feel like someone should be able to tell this DA that this case, this criminal case is basically a travesty of justice. It never should have been brought. And this couple should be given a public apology. And I don't know, they wanted to make an example of this couple in terms of defending their property, but I think that it's time for us citizens to start making an example of these politicians and attorneys, prosecutors and stuff who, it's time to make an example of them. When they violate our rights, recourse needs to be had against them. And this district attorney in Missouri, like I said, she should be disbarred. So that is that. And let's see, I haven't been checking my chat at all. I don't even know if I can, let me see if I can see it. Sorry, dead air. Did they reverse the cam pin on the bolt carrier? See, but I'm not familiar with that terminology either. That would
be for the AR, so...
Oh, okay.
Because this was for the handgun. And I'm not familiar with the handgun, so I don't know exactly what they would have done, so...
And to be honest, I didn't look with enough detail to really know exactly which brand or which make of handgun she had. So it would be hard for me to really know. But man, it is just so gross how they get away with this stuff, just tampering with evidence. And the governor is like, oh, well, if they actually get convicted, then I'll do something. It's like, well, but they're still going to have to go through all this crap. You're going to make them go through a trial, It's just awful. So I'm going to round out the show tonight. Sorry, my contacts are giving me a little trouble. I'm going to round out the show tonight in my spirituality section by talking about what's happening to all these churches across the country. Now, it's not as if I would be okay with this happening to other churches either. I want to make clear that I believe in religious freedom for all religions in this country. It's one of the reasons why, the Pilgrims sailed here. It's the doctrine of religious freedom goes back so far. It is so important to me. And I feel like these are really some attacks on, it's hard to say it's attacks on our religious liberty just because it's not the government that's doing this necessarily, but it's certainly a cultural attack on Christianity, at minimum, and I think it's something that we should all be very alarmed about. Because if I saw this happening to mosques, if I saw this happening to synagogues, if I saw this happening to, I don't know, fuck, do Hindus have a worship location? So, I don't know, but you know what I mean? If places of worship are being vandalized, burned down, destroyed, all of this is just horrible, and we need to actively speak out against it. So I have this article, and I'm just going to go through all of these churches. I won't go into a lot of detail. I'll basically just read all of these headlines so that you can know, or actually, basically just so that all these stories can be told on YouTube at least once. All right? So, Boston Police Department are investigating an arson incident after a statue of the Virgin Mary was set on fire at a church in the city's Dorchester neighborhood. And there's a picture of her torched. Oh, it is just so gruesome to see. Florida man was arrested on Saturday after he allegedly drove his minivan into a Catholic church and then set it on fire. Now, this story was crazy, man. There were people in the church praying when this man did this, okay? He drove a car into a church, jumped out with tanks of gasoline, poured them all over the place, and lit it. There were people in there. Like, that's attempted murder, man. Come on. Statue of Virgin Mary vandalized outside of Catholic school, a Catholic cathedral prep school at a seminary in Queens. And this one, I don't know if you guys can see this. Yeah, you actually can, yeah. So this is the Virgin Mary, and it just says across her womb, right? Across the part of the statue that literally represents where she bore Christ, it says idol. What great people, you know, such tolerant, loving people. Oh yeah, Sean King, by the way. This article has some of Sean King's tweets. This man is, he's just insane. Sean King is white, by the way. I just want to point that out. So Sean King says, yes, I think the statues of the white European that they claim is Jesus should also come down. They are a form of white supremacy and always have been. In the Bible, when the family of Jesus wanted to hide and blend in, guess where they went? Egypt, not Denmark. Tear them down. Okay, there are so many stupid things that he said in that tweet. But I want to take just one moment to talk about this whole situation of, like, Jesus isn't white, stop depicting him as white, whatever. I agree, Jesus wasn't white. He wasn't. He was Middle Eastern. He probably looked, you know, Mediterranean-ish, you know? He might have looked Greekish, something like that. He certainly was at least olive complexion. He certainly wasn't a blonde. You know, that would be really strange. But I just want to point out that it's not like this is unique to Europeans to depict Jesus as looking like them. Because guess what? If you go to Asia, you know, if you go to Japan, if you go to South Korea, guess what Jesus looks like? You know, it's like artists will depict Jesus to look like a representation of being part of their culture. Because the truth is that Jesus died for all of us. He didn't just die for, you know, Middle Eastern people, and he didn't just die for Europeans. He died for everyone and rose again, right? So we can't say, like, if you depict Jesus as white, you're a racist. It's like, well, you know, he certainly wasn't chocolate either, you know. He was Mediterranean. He was probably, you know, like I said, he has olive complexion probably. He might look Turkish, Greek, something like that. But, you know, there's plenty of depictions of Jesus where he's very dark-skinned. It's like, that's not accurate either. Jesus also wasn't Hispanic. But the Virgin Mary also wasn't Hispanic. But what's going on with Our Lady of Guadalupe, huh? Is that racist? No. So, again, this is all nonsense. And the other thing that I hate is they try to say, they'll talk out of both sides of their mouth. They'll say that Jesus is not white, but they'll also say that Christianity is part of whiteness. You can't have it both ways. All right. Sean King goes on. All murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy. Created as tools of oppression, racist propaganda, they should all come down. That is so crazy. That is so crazy. Could you imagine telling someone in South America that by depicting Our Lady of Guadalupe as Hispanic, that's just a tool of, like, racist propaganda, because she's not Hispanic, damn it, and how dare you depict her that way? Here's one of the differences between Christianity and Islam, all right? We like to depict our Lord, all right? We view that as a way of honoring him, as a way of glorifying him. Like, what do you think the Sistine Chapel was about? Why do you think that Michelangelo did that? You know? It was to glorify God. When we have pictures of saints, when we have stained glass, when we have statues of the Virgin Mary, these are like the equivalents of us having photos of our family members up in our house, right? This is our family in God. And so we like to have depictions of them. We love them. We have them around. It is not a tool of oppression. And Sean King is clearly low IQ. It kind of disproves Stefan Molyneux's whole hypothesis, as he is very much a white guy and has a low IQ on that. All right, let's see. California, in the city of Los Angeles, the San Gabriel Mission, a 249-year-old church was engulfed in flames in the early hours of Saturday morning. Think about that. The roof of that church is just totally gone. 250 years old, gone. Yeah, here's more pictures of it. Yeah, sorry, they show a lot of pictures of that particular church in California, because they're really, again, I don't know if you guys can see this very well, but the roof is just completely collapsed in. Like, there's no one worshiping in there. And that's the thing too. It's not just like, oh, they burned down a church, there's property damage, but you can't worship in there anymore. You know? This is a space that people, the Catholics, go to be able to exercise their freedom of religion. And they're just being destroyed all over the country. We need to protect our cathedrals and our churches, all of them. Yeah, let's see. In Missouri, authorities are looking into a suspected arson attack in Johnson County, where a 100-year-old church was set ablaze. Harmony Baptist Church was burned to the ground at 11:22 p.m. on July 5th, according to Johnson County Fire Protection District. It's crazy. Let's see. Oh gosh, the pictures of the church in Florida are horrible too. The roof caved in. You can see that all of these beams, are just falling into all of the pews. I mean, thank God no one was hurt. One cool thing about the church in Florida, though, that's where the guy drove in and threw gasoline everywhere. There were some relics in the church that were miraculously unharmed, including there was basically like a host, a whole Eucharist host, and it was preserved, or no. Yeah, the Eucharist was preserved, but there was also a relic that was preserved in black velvet. And everything up and into the black velvet was completely scorched, but the relic and the velvet were totally unharmed. Cool stuff. Just debris everywhere. And then the last one I want to talk about, I don't know if that headline's even in here, but there was also a cathedral in Nantes, France, that was set ablaze. And I mean, this fire was crazy. If you guys know Notre Dame, and you remember when that burned down, and that actually was news, but we still have no idea what caused that. One of the most prolific pieces of architecture in the Western world burns down, and we're like, whoops. And not only that, but one of the most beautiful symbols of the Catholic faith in Europe, just brutally destroyed, and they're gonna rebuild it with these weird new. They're not rebuilding it as it looked. They're not rebuilding the Gothic architecture that made Notre Dame so pretty. And now we have, I think it was last week, we have in Nantes another cathedral getting burned to the ground, and it was so horrifying. They had a similar stained glass, a circular stained glass image on the front of the church, and there's just fire and smoke bursting out of it. And again, it's like, whoops. Like, with that one, they're not even trying to say that they think it's arson yet. So anyway, I go into all of this not just to be really depressing or be like, oh, like they're, like, woe's me, they're hating on the Catholics, even though they are hating on the Catholics. But Jesus warned us that this would happen. In any event. But this is a call to the Catholic men that watch my channel. It is time to start defending Catholic property. Okay? I know a lot of Catholics love their right to bear arms, and I know a lot of Catholics are horrified to see these churches burning down. And same with, if you're Protestants, God bless you, you're wrong about a lot of stuff, but I'm sure you feel the same way. To see a Baptist church burn down or any other Christian church burn down is just horrifying. But, there's been protests going on in various cities, downtown, at city halls, where people are armed, and they'll protect statues, or they'll be armed peacefully to show that, they're not going to put up with something anymore. And I think that it's time, like we Christians, I said that, I talked about this in another podcast. Christ told us to, if we don't have a sword, to sell our cloak and buy one. And it's time. We have to start protecting these places. And I'm not sure exactly what all of the legal aspect of protecting church property is, but we can't leave this up to the priests and the bishops to protect the churches. It's really not their job to be defending the actual property itself. We should be defending our priests and bishops from the angry mobs. Where is the Knights of Columbus, right? Like that's a Catholic men's organization. They walk around with their kind of, they've got really flashy garments, they've got the duckbill suits and the hats with the feathers, and they even have, I think they have like little sabers that they carry around. But where are the Knights of Columbus standing outside of these churches with their sabers? Protect the churches. And my God, we've got cathedrals that are hundreds of years old getting destroyed. Cathedrals that took hundreds of years to build getting destroyed. Some of that architecture, we don't even have the technology to build again. It's lost. The technology's lost. So we need to protect our cathedrals. We need to protect our churches. And please, Catholic men, it would be real cute if I was out there, with my little revolver trying to protect a cathedral, okay? But the great thing about Christianity is that it actually teaches men healthy masculinity. And so it is time, men, it is time, Christian men, to start peacefully defending our churches and our monuments and our statues and stuff. Like, really, we're in danger, man. Especially because if we just let these mobs do this, this is the Blessed Mother. How are you just going to let her get defaced like this? Let God's house get burned down. It's time to stand up, men. Anyway, with that, I will call it a night. I've ranted enough. I'm very passionate about the stuff I talked about tonight, so if you made it this far in the podcast, congratulations. You've dealt with me at my worst. But thank you so much for tuning in. I want to thank Edgar so much for being my producer and Guns for Everyone for making this podcast possible. I actually am going to be taking one of their defensive pistol training courses here in August, so I'm really excited about that. If you are in Colorado and you want to get a concealed carry license, or if you want to take a defensive training class, please look into Guns for Everyone. You can go to their website at gunsforeveryone.com. Their concealed carry classes are free, although here in Colorado there's a couple counties that are giving them a hard time right now. So some of our sheriffs are not really abiding by the law as it pertains to us being a shall issue state, and some of the orders that have gone into place since COVID. But in any event, please support Guns for Everyone if you can. Great organization. They make this podcast possible, and I'm always so thankful to Edgar for allowing me to be here when I do actually decide to show up. And also, I want to thank my patrons, Brett and Colin. Thank you so much for your contributions to this show. Your patronage does actually help cover some of the various software that allows me to stream this to a lot of different devices. It allows me just to make this process as seamless as I can, given the circumstances. So thank you so much. If you want to become a patron, you can very easily at patreon.com/Nina Down the Rabbit Hole. I did actually create tiers if you want. If you're not a big fan of Patreon, and I totally understand why you might not be, I also have what am I talking about? I purchased a post office box. So if you want to send a donation that way, or even if you just want to send me a letter or something, even if it's hate mail, you can send it to my P.O. box. I will put that in the description after the show. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I do have a P.O. box, and I always appreciate any commentary you might have. But with that said, the best thing you can do if you want to support this podcast is just share it to whoever you think might want to listen. Or, drop it on Facebook and trigger some people, because I assure you that listening to, I don't know how long I've been streaming, but to the last hour and a half or so, I assure you that you'll trigger some people with the content that I've given you tonight. But with that said, I hope you all have a great night. I hope you live free. And just remember this quote from Matthew, that Christ is sending us out like sheep among wolves. So, we need to be vigilant. We're not in a world of people who are just going to be sunflowers and daisies all the time. So it's time to stand up for our faith, and it's time to stand up for our liberties too. Otherwise, they'll be gone for good. But anyway, I hope you all have a great night, and live free, everyone. I'll see you guys soon.